Found out I had 3 siblings around the globe. When I reached out, 2 of them blocked me immediately. I found out the reason from the third one, and it wasn't pretty. I want to start with what I have. Not what I was looking for, not what I found, what I have. I'm 30 years old. I have a wife named Claire who laughs at things that deserve to be laughed at, and is honest with me in the specific way of someone who loves you enough to tell you the truth even when it's inconvenient. I have a son named Eli who is 4 years old and has recently decided that dinosaurs are the most important subject in the world, and I am inclined to agree with him. I have parents, my parents, the ones who matter, the ones who showed up, named Carol and David, who adopted me when I was 9 years old and have never once made me feel like anything other than their son. I have a good life. I want you to hold that before I tell you anything else, because what I'm about to tell you passed through me and left me changed, and I need you to understand that changed doesn't mean broken. Changed means I know something now that I didn't know before, and I've decided what to do with it. That decision is the whole story. I've known I was adopted since I was 9. Not revealed dramatically, I was 9 when it happened, old enough to understand what adoption meant in the practical sense, even if the emotional dimensions of it took years to fully arrive. Carol and David were honest with me from the beginning. They told me what they knew about my biological family, which was not much. That I had been in the foster system for a period before them. That there were circumstances they didn't have full information about. That if I ever wanted to search, they would support me completely. I didn't search for a long time. Not out of fear exactly. Not out of loyalty to Carol and David. They'd made it clear enough times that searching wouldn't be a betrayal that I believed them. It was more that the question of origin felt like a room in the house I was living in that I'd never opened. Not a scary room, just a closed one. I could feel it was there. I didn't feel an urgent need to go in. I was 30 when I opened it. Not because something changed dramatically. Just because Eli was born and something about watching him arrive, this small complete person who came from Claire and from me and from whatever was behind both of us, made the closed room feel worth opening. Not urgent, just worth it. I did a DNA test through one of the ancestry platforms. The kind that gives you health information and ethnicity breakdowns and connects you to potential relatives. I did it mostly out of curiosity. Told Claire I was doing it. She said that's interesting and meant it. The results came back 3 weeks later. 3 sibling matches. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I want to tell you how I made the decision to reach out, because the process of it matters. I talked to Claire first. Not asking permission, she would have been irritated by that framing, and rightly so. Just thinking out loud to the person I think out loud to. She listened, asked good questions, said that whatever I decided she was with me. Said also, with the specific honesty I married her for, that she thought I should go in without expectations. That DNA matches were not the same as family, and family was not the same as connection, and connection was something that had to be built, not assumed. I said I knew that. She said, I know you know it. I'm saying it anyway because you're a person who hopes, and hopping is good, but not when it gets ahead of reality. I said that was fair. Then I talked to Carol and David. That conversation was harder in a way I hadn't anticipated, not because they made it hard, but because they made it easy in a way that cost them something, and I could see it costing them. David said he thought it was a natural thing to want to know. Carol said she'd always wondered when I'd ask and was glad I felt ready. She said it like she'd been holding something carefully for 20 years and was now setting it down gently. I told her I wasn't replacing anything. She said she knew that. She said it the way you say things you know intellectually and are still working on feeling completely. I told her I loved her. She said she knew that too. I contacted the first sibling a week later. Her name was Maya, 26 years old. The DNA match suggested half-sibling, shared biological mother according to the platform's analysis. She responded within hours. Warm, immediately warm with the specific energy of someone who had been waiting for this kind of message, even if they hadn't known they were waiting. She said she'd wondered if she had other siblings. Said the match percentage was consistent with what she'd hoped. Said she had 1,000 questions. We exchanged messages for 4 days. Good messages, real ones. She told me about her life, her job, her city, a dog she had named after a musician I'd never heard of. I told her about Claire and Eli. She asked to see a photo of Eli. I sent one. She sent back a voice note, just her laughing and saying he looks exactly like someone she knew without explaining who. I replayed that voice note 3 times. Something about it made me feel like I was standing at the edge of something real. On the 5th day, her messages stopped. I waited a day, sent a gentle follow-up, nothing. The next day I checked the platform. She'd blocked me there, checked my phone, blocked there too, every channel simultaneously. Clean, thorough, like a door not just closing but being locked from the inside. I sat with that for a long time. The second sibling was a man named Derek, 28. Same biological mother match. I'd been more cautious reaching out to him. Maya's silence had arrived while I was still composing the message to Derek, and I sent it anyway, but with the specific careful energy of someone who has already learned something about hopping. Derek was warm too, different warmth than Maya, more measured, more adult, but genuine. He asked thoughtful questions about my adoption, seemed genuinely interested in the timeline of things. We talked for 6 days. Then the same thing happened. Silence, check, block, gone. The second time was different from the first. The first time I'd been confused. The second time I was something else. Not angry, something more disorienting than anger. The specific feeling of a pattern that implies something without explaining itself. 2 people, same warmth, same sudden total silence, same clean disappearance. I told Claire that night. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "That's strange." Not you're imagining it, not maybe they just got busy, strange. She named it accurately, and I needed that more than I knew. I said, "Did I do something?" She said, "No, I read those messages. You were careful and warm and appropriate, and you gave them room. Whatever this is, it isn't about something you did." I said, "Then what is it about?" She said, "I don't know, but it's strange, and you're allowed to say it's strange." I lay in the dark that night and thought about what strange meant in this context. Strange meant coordinated, or strange meant coincidence. Coincidence felt increasingly unlikely. Coordinated meant something had been communicated between them that I wasn't part of. Something that changed the calculation for both of them simultaneously. I didn't know what that something was. I still don't know completely. What I know is that the not knowing sat in me for months like a low-grade temperature. Not debilitating, not dramatic, just present. The specific weight of a question that won't resolve and that you can't stop turning over even when you know turning it over isn't productive. The third match sat in my account for 3 months before I contacted him. His name was shown on the platform as Thomas H., 54 years old. The match percentage was different from Maya and Derek, different enough that the platform flagged it. Same half-sibling category, but the shared DNA pointed to a different parent. Not the biological mother I shared with Maya and Derek. The biological father. A different branch entirely. I looked at his profile for 3 months, not every day, just occasionally. The way you look at a door you're not sure you want to open. The reason I waited wasn't complicated. It was the simple arithmetic of having been warmly received and then disappeared from twice in a row. The first time disorients you. The second time teaches you something about what reaching out can cost. The third time felt like a choice I needed to be very sure about. Claire didn't push me. Neither did Carol and David. They all knew about Thomas. They let me arrive at the decision myself. One evening in January, I was putting Eli to bed. He wanted the dinosaur book. He always wants the dinosaur book. And halfway through it, he fell asleep in that specific way of small children, completely and suddenly, like someone had turned off a switch. I sat next to him in the dark for a while with the book still open. I thought about being 9 years old, about what it felt like to arrive somewhere new, about Carol and David opening a door. I went and wrote to Thomas. He responded the next morning. The message was 2 paragraphs long, and I have read it enough times that I could reproduce it from memory, but I won't because it belongs to him. What I'll tell you is that it was warm in a way that was different in quality from Maya's warmth and Derek's warmth. Theirs had been the warmth of people opening something new. Thomas's was the warmth of someone who has been open for a long time and has room for more. The warmth of a man who has built enough and is genuinely glad to share it. He said he hadn't known I existed. He said that wasn't a complaint, just a fact. He said the DNA match was a surprise and a good one. He said he had questions, but they could wait. He said first, he just wanted me to know that he was glad I'd reached out and that whatever I needed this to be, a conversation, a relationship, nothing at all, was completely up to me. I wrote back immediately. That was the beginning. Thomas lives 2 states away. He works in civil engineering, has for 30 years, the kind of career built from showing up consistently rather than brilliantly, which I mean as a genuine compliment. He has a wife named Patricia who by all accounts is the reason he is as functional as he is, which is how he describes it and which Patricia apparently endorses. He has 2 adult children, and 7 months before I contacted him, his daughter had a baby, his first grandchild, a girl named June. He told me about June in the 3rd message. Something about the way he described her, not the details, just the specific softness of how a man in his mid-50s talks about the first grandchild, made something in me relax that I hadn't known was tense. We talked for weeks before we met, long messages, occasional phone calls. He told me about his life. I told him about mine. He asked about Claire in the way of someone genuinely curious rather than performing interest. He asked about Eli and I sent photos, and he responded with a voice note of himself laughing in a way that sounded like warmth made audible. The first time we met was at a diner halfway between our 2 states. I drove 4 hours. He drove 4 hours. We arrived within 10 minutes of each other. I recognized him immediately from his photos. He's taller than I expected. He has a way of standing that suggests someone who has been at ease in his own body for a long time. He shook my hand and then pulled me into a brief hug with the lack of self-consciousness of someone for whom physical warmth is just normal, not performed, just how he is. We sat in a booth and ordered coffee and talked for 4 hours. I don't remember everything we said. I remember the quality of it. The ease of it that shouldn't have been there given that we'd known each other for a matter of weeks and had met for the first time that morning. The ease that comes from 2 people who are telling each other the truth and both know it. At some point he said, "Can I ask about Maya and Derek?" I told him what had happened, the warmth and then the silence, the blocking, the pattern that implied coordination without explaining itself. He was quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable quiet, thinking quiet. He said, "I've been thinking about that since you told me, about what it might mean about how we're all connected." I said, "I've been thinking about it for months." He said, "I think there's something there. I think I might have something at home that's connected to it. I'm not sure. I want to look at it again before I say more." I said okay, and meant it, and we went back to talking about other things. 3 weeks later, he sent me a photograph. An old document. A letter, technically, handwritten on paper that had yellowed slightly at the edges. He said he'd had it for 15 years. Found it after his father died in a box of personal papers. Had read it then and understood it partially, his father writing to someone, addressing them with a name Thomas didn't recognize, describing something he was sorry for, asking for forgiveness for a choice that had been necessary at the time even if it wasn't right. Thomas had filed it under his father's private history and hadn't thought about it much since. When I came along, he'd gone back to find it. He photographed it and sent it to me, and I sat at my kitchen table in the early morning before Claire and Eli were awake, and I read it slowly. The name his father was writing to was a woman's name, a name I didn't know, but the details in the letter, a specific time period, a specific city, a specific situation described with the careful language of someone confessing something to someone who already knew the outline of it, placed the relationship at a time that aligned precisely with when I would have been conceived. Thomas's father was my father. Thomas and I shared a biological father who had a relationship with a woman, my biological mother, that produced me. The letter was his father apologizing for the relationship, for the circumstances, for something described obliquely as the outcome that couldn't be avoided, for a choice that he'd had to make that wasn't fair to anyone. I read it twice. Then I sat in my kitchen in the early morning quiet with the photograph of a letter on my phone, and I thought about Maya and Derek, their mother, who had been in a relationship with a man who had also had a relationship with someone else, who had produced a child, me, that the relationship with their mother couldn't contain, who had given that child up at 9 years old when the truth of his parentage became impossible to hold alongside the family that was already built. Maya and Derek had reached out warmly. Then they'd done their own research, and they'd found the same thing I was now looking at, evidence that their mother had had a relationship outside their family, that I was the result of it, that the comfortable history they'd been living with had a chapter in it they hadn't known about. They hadn't cut me off because of anything I did. They'd cut me off because I was the living proof of something about their mother that they weren't ready to know. I was the door that had opened onto something they'd needed to close. I wasn't the problem. I was the evidence. Thomas drove to us that weekend. He and Claire got along immediately and completely in the way that occasionally just happens between people who are both direct and both kind. He and Patricia video called in the afternoon, and Patricia made Claire laugh twice in the first 5 minutes, which I counted as an extraordinary achievement. He and Eli talked about dinosaurs for 45 minutes, and Thomas held his own. In the evening, after Eli was in bed and Claire had gone to give us space, Thomas and I sat at the kitchen table with the photograph of the letter on the table between us. We'd both read it multiple times by then. We'd each arrived at the same understanding from our respective angles. He said, "There's more to find, if we wanted to find it." I said, "I know." He said, "The woman in the letter, your biological mother, Maya and Derek's mother, she's presumably still alive. She might have records, more history." I said, "She might." He said, "Maya and Derek are out there, living with whatever version of this they're living with." I said, "Yes." He looked at the photograph for a moment. Then he looked at me. And I looked at him. The kitchen was quiet. The house was quiet. From Eli's room, I could hear the specific small sounds of a 4-year-old asleep. We didn't speak for a while. I thought about the weight of what was behind the letter. A woman who had made choices under circumstances I didn't know. A man who had written an apology in private and then died leaving it in a box. 2 people who had received a message from a stranger and felt something that made them disappear. A biological history that was tangled and human and full of things that would cost people to know. I thought about Carol and David, about the room they'd been living in for 20 years, the open door they'd held ready for whenever I was ready. I thought about Claire upstairs, about Eli asleep, about Thomas across the table from me, about Patricia on a video call making Claire laugh, about a first grandchild named June. I thought about the garden. I should tell you about the garden. I've had the image my whole life. Not every day, I don't want to overstate it, but consistently, reliably, the way certain images just stay. A garden, the quality of the light at a specific time of day, late afternoon. The light going gold, a low stone wall along one edge, a particular kind of tree I've never been able to name, the leaves moving in a specific way, the feeling of being small, of being held by someone I can't see who I can only feel the arms, the feeling of being entirely safe. I'd always assumed it was a constructed memory, something my mind had assembled from fragments and emotion and made into a place, the kind of thing people have that doesn't correspond to anywhere real. Sitting at the table with Thomas, I told him about it. I don't know why that was the moment. It just was. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a while. Then he said, "My father had a house before he married my mother, a rental in a specific city." He named the city. He used to talk about the garden, stone wall on one edge, a big maple tree. Maple, that's the tree I couldn't name. He sold the house when he got married, but he talked about that garden sometimes, said it was the last place he'd felt. He used the word uncomplicated. The last place things had been uncomplicated. I looked at the photograph of the letter. The city named in the letter was the same city. The garden was real. It had always been real. I had been there as a child, small enough to be held in someone's arms, and the specific quality of the light at late afternoon in that garden had stayed in me for 21 years without a name or a location. It had a location now. I didn't need to go there. Just knowing it existed was enough. Thomas and I looked at each other across the kitchen table. The letter between us, the full shape of what we'd found sitting in the air. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. After a while, he picked up the photograph, looked at it once more, set it down. I looked at it once more. Then I turned the phone face down on the table. He watched me do it. He nodded once, very small. That was the decision, not discussed, not debated, not weighed against alternatives out loud, just made, in the way that the right decisions sometimes make themselves when two people understand the same thing at the same moment. There is more behind the letter. There is a woman out there who made choices I don't know the context of. There are two people who reached out to me and then disappeared who are carrying their own version of this. There is a biological history with more chapters in it than we've read. We chose not to read further. Not because the truth doesn't matter, because the cost of it, to people who are already living their lives, who are already carrying whatever they're carrying, felt like something we didn't have the right to impose. Because what we had in this kitchen at this table on this specific evening was already more than I'd started this year with. Because Thomas had a first grandchild named June, and I had Eli asleep in the next room, and we had both spent our whole lives being loved by the families that raised us and the families we'd made, and that was real in a way that felt worth protecting. Because sometimes the door you opened gives you what you needed, and closing it is not the same as losing it. Thomas comes to visit twice a year. We drive to him twice a year. Patricia and Claire have a friendship that has nothing to do with us, and that both Claire and I find genuinely amusing. Eli calls Thomas Uncle Thomas, which Thomas claims does not make him emotional and which is an obvious lie. Carol and David have met Thomas. That afternoon, the four of them at Carol and David's kitchen table, my adoptive parents and my biological half-brother, all of them being careful and warm and adult about something that could have been awkward and wasn't, is one of the moments from this whole experience that I return to most. Carol made her coffee cake. Thomas had 2 pieces. David talked about baseball for 45 minutes, and Thomas, who does not care about baseball, listened with the attention of someone who knows that being listened to is the gift. On the way home, Thomas said, "Your parents are wonderful." I said, "I know." He said, "You were lucky." I said, "I know that too. Maya and Derek are out there somewhere. I don't know what they know now. I don't know what they did with whatever they found when they did their own research. I don't know if they've talked to each other about me, or if they've decided to bury it, or if they're carrying it the way I carried the unanswered question for months. I hope they're okay. I mean that without irony and without residual hurt. The hurt resolved when I understood that the silence was never about me. They were protecting themselves from something I accidentally opened. I understand that now. I might have done the same. I don't carry it anymore. What I carry instead is the garden. The low stone wall, the maple tree, the late afternoon light going gold, the feeling of being held by arms I can't see, the complete safety of it. I know where it is now. I know what it was. I know why I've always gone back to it. I'm not going to go there. It's a street somewhere in a city, some other family's garden now, a place that has no relationship to me except the one I was too young to remember having. But it's real. It was always real. And there's something specific about knowing that an image you've carried your whole life has a location, that it isn't a dream your mind assembled, that it happened, that you were there, that someone held you in a garden in late afternoon light, and that was real, and it mattered even if you can't remember the face of who was holding you. There's something specific about that. I don't have the word for it exactly, but I know what I have. I have Claire and Eli. I have Carol and David. I have Thomas and Patricia and a first grandchild named June who I have met once and who held my finger with her whole fist and looked at me with the complete unself-conscious attention of someone brand new to the world. I have a garden that exists somewhere. I have enough.